What's going on? Thank you for joining me today. My name is Derek, and this is the Producer's Journal podcast. In this podcast, I share stories about my experiences as a podcast producer and small business owner of a podcast production agency called Shelby Row Productions. I talk about the past, present, and future goals in hopes that you learn from my stories and my mistakes. So with that said, this today's entry is going to have a mistake involved with it, and that I got very lucky that it turned out okay. So here's some context. In this entry, I'm going to talk about my now studio office that I have leased. And this has been something that I've been planning for a while now and been wanting to do it for even longer. But it wasn't until a couple months ago that I really started the search. But before I get to that, the reason I want a studio office is to get more local where I live. Ever since the beginning of my podcast producer time, which is January of 2018 is when I started as a whole. And then the agency started June of 2019. It's always been virtual. I've always worked out of my apartments. And for the last 2.5 years, out of my bedroom, but I always, bought some nice equipment. So as I record this right now, I'm still in my bedroom, but I'm talking into a nice Shure SMB7 mic, a Rodecaster. I have panel lighting. So when I do a video from my desk or if I'm on a Zoom call, I look good. I have a backdrop I'll put up so no one sees my bed. So I've managed to look and sound professional over the years, but limited in what I can do. And I always wanted a studio office, something modest, just a little like pod station, table, 3 mics, 3 cameras, some lights, sound paneling. That's about it. Backlighting, and there you go. So last year I bought pretty much all the equipment that I needed for that, and knowing that at some point I would need it. And last year I just had the cash flow and some foresight and invested in another Rodecaster, 3 microphones. I can't think of what they are right now on the spot here. Obviously all the headphones. I already had 2 cameras, so I bought a 3rd camera. I bought a 3-tree light set. I have no idea what model and company it is. I'm pretty bad at that, but they're all in their case sitting in my closet right now. I just really bought what I needed, minus a table and some chairs. So that's some investment coming up ahead of me. But before I get too off track here, so coming into this year, I knew that I wanted to try to find a space that was sort of on my goals. I made a list of goals like you're supposed to as a business owner. And 2022 was certainly a year where I really would have loved to see myself in an office. So I was talking to another local business owner here, and she was actually a guest on my podcast, The Real Hernando, which I've mentioned in past entries. I think you can listen to entry 3 and get the backstory on that. Her name is Kim, and she owns a place called City Hall Cheesecake, and had a great interview. It was all good. And then afterwards we're chatting, and I tell her how I'm looking for an office space. And by this time, I'm throwing the words out there. I'm putting it out there. Anytime I have a chance, I'm talking to any business owner or people that I know from the Chamber of Commerce, what have you. I've been throwing it out there. So I threw it out there to Kim. Come to find out, her husband owns this big building right across the street from her cheesecake store, right downtown Hernando, right in the center. This really nice old school white building with giant pillars. Looks like straight out of the early 1900s. And he bought it and renovated it and turned it into a lot of different share space offices. So you actually just rent a room and then all the utilities are covered except for internet, and then you share a kitchen, conference room, and bathrooms with the other rooms, the other businesses. And that's exactly what I want. That's all I need. So I call her husband, and I finally get him on the phone, and I learn more about how it works and what he has and what the rates are. Unfortunately, he was leased out, but he told me, 250 square foot some odd room and $600 a month, all included except for internet. And I was like, wow, that's not as much as I expected. Not really knowing what office leases are like, but what I do know is I can afford that. So I finally realized this is more feasible than I anticipated. In my mind, for whatever reason, I always pictured brick and mortar, like I needed some kind of storefront. No, I don't need that. Just need a room. So now I realize, okay, this is very doable. Now the search is on. And for about 6 weeks, I am looking online, trying to get any contact I can get that's advertising lease office space, exhausted those options, and then started asking people who would refer me to the next person, and then that person would know another person. So then I started working in a network of people that are in the know and know where there's available office space in places that I would never find online. And nothing. I found 2 offices, but they're massive 3-room offices with its own kitchenette and its own bathroom. In essence, it's like its own apartment, and you're on the hook for all the utilities, and it's just bigger than I need and more expensive. So the 2 options that I did have were just too big for me. I just didn't even want them. So I decided I'm going to just set up a follow-up schedule and just follow up with these people periodically just to check in. Hey, has anything opened up? Has anything opened up at your place? And that was my game plan because I felt like I hit a dead end. Well, one day, me and my daughter are driving through town. We hit a red light, and my daughter's like, Dad, look. And she proceeds to point across the intersection to this 3-story building that's right off town square and a big sign, office space, with a phone number. I was like, yes. To me, that's new. I think that sign was fairly new. At the very least, I never noticed it. So I immediately pulled off when the green light hit. I just turned off into a gas station parking lot. That way I could get a photo of that sign. So that was 2.5 weeks ago, and called the number. I ended up getting the owner, who owns a leasing company, and he told me exactly what I wanted to hear. It's a 250 square foot room, $600 a month, all utilities included except for internet, share space, conference, share kitchen, share bathrooms, and the location is amazing. And when we hung up and we scheduled a time to meet the next day, no, I take that back. It was later. I called him in the morning. It was later that afternoon. It was a Friday. And it was 4:00, Friday at 4, which later becomes a pain because we couldn't sign a lease then. But I knew I wanted the place. I could already tell. I just at least obviously needed to see it. But when I went to meet Dale, the owner, when I left with my checkbook. It was 100% ready to sign a lease. And then I find out it's only a 12-month lease. So even better, because typically commercial spaces are multiple year commitments. So I see the place. It's amazing. It's so awesome. And it's got a big window, so it looks really great. Obviously, I'm going to be covering that window with a blackout curtain, but that's probably for another entry as I start building this studio, because this will be the first entry of many where you hear me talk about this studio, because it's very present, and this is what I'm going through right now. So I signed the lease that following Monday. I pay the first month's rent, and the deposit is also the same amount as the first month's rent. So it's $1,200 right out of the gate. Bam. I'm like, all right, good to go. Now, The issue that I come across is the red tape. So there's 3 levels. There's my business through the Treasury, which is where I get my EIN number, the employment identification number, also known as your federal tax number. You got your LLC formation, and then you have to operate in the city, so you got to get a city license and then a permit. Okay, so a lot of things to think about. What I didn't know is to work in the city of Hernando, Mississippi, before you lease a space, you have to make sure that it's the proper zoning for your business. Meaning, you can't just lease a standard office space like mine and then start a bakery in it. So businesses fall into zoning groups, and then those zoning groups are mapped out on a city map, sectioned off in different colors. I didn't know this. I signed the lease before doing this, and this is where the major mistake happens, but luckily it has a happy ending. So how that worked is I called the city to work on the city license, and then that's when they find out I hadn't called them first. They're like, well, before we do that, we need to make sure your business is zoned properly. Great. So I tell them where the address is of the office, and they tell me, okay, that zone is C3, and give us a couple days, and we'll research this. And of course, they asked me what I do, and I was very honest. I was straight up with them. Like, it's going to be an office mainly for me at my desk, but it'll be a podcast recording station with microphones, cameras, and lights, but LED lights, and I made sure that they knew it wasn't going to be loud and it was going to be safe. So she seemed to think it's going to be okay, but we need to check first. So I'm like, great. So I couldn't sleep for a couple days because there's a potential where I leased a space that I can't use, and that was terrifying. So they finally hit back a couple days later, and they're like, good news, you're okay. But we will say you got lucky. I'm like, oh, now what? Obviously, podcast production agency isn't on any zoning list. It's just not common enough, right? I mean, and by now I'd looked at the list. My friend had kind of looked it up for me, and now I was seeing the zoning on the map and then what businesses fall under the zoning. And under C3, of course, there's nothing that's there that says podcast production agency. So that was making me nervous too. But when I finally got a phone call, she said straight up, look, your kind of business is not on the C3 list, but what is on that list is radio station. So apparently I could start a radio station in the building I'm in, which I think is more extreme because that takes towers. So I don't know how that works, but luckily radio saved the day because they were able to categorize me under that umbrella. So they're like, you're good to go. Oh, thank God. So that was a big win. That was, I was able to sleep that night. And some of the other red tape I had to deal with is the Treasury. That's a simple fix. That's just an address change. The big hurdle to leap over is domesticating my business. Up until now, my business location and formation has been in tennis. What the fuck does that mean? Has been in Tennessee. So I really just wanted to put everything, legitimize everything, and really button this up and make it super clean and correct. So I want to move my business from Tennessee to Mississippi. Domestication, as they call it, as I've learned. And that's a shit show. And you have to work with the Secretary of State that the business, let me start that over. When you domesticate, you're working with both states. So you're talking to the people at the Tennessee Secretary of State and Mississippi. So you go to Mississippi and you ask them what you need. What do I need to move from Tennessee? And they tell me. Okay. Then they say, well, then you got to call the Tennessee office and confirm with them and see what they say. Okay. So this is when I quickly noticed every state's different, obviously, and they don't talk to each other. They don't know what's going on. So then I call the Tennessee office, and their information's contradicting and confusing. And not to bury you in too much weeds here, but the moral of that story is I just fucking hired someone to do it for me. I tried myself. I contacted the Small Business Association in Mississippi, and then they sent me to the Small Business Development Counseling Center, where I actually talked to a human who was really nice, and he was going to help me, and he did help me on a few things. But when it came to the domestication part, even he was a little like weary of how to do it properly. And that's why it's so important to do it properly, and here's why. What you don't want to do is just close your business and then open up a new LLC in the next state, because that wipes out everything. You have to get a new EIN number with the Treasury. And what I've been told is when you just close a business down, you're supposed to liquidate it, and all contracts are null and void. Don't want that. Domesticating your business means you take it with you, all the history, all the contracts, the EIN number. It's not forming a new business in Mississippi. It's transporting one to Mississippi. So that's why it's important it's done right. And I certainly don't want to screw with it anymore. So I hired a business called myusacorporation.com. Of course, that takes money, but I didn't give a shit at that point. I was ready to have someone take care of it for me. So, and that's where I'm at right now. So now that I was approved through the city, they had to do a little fire inspection, basically where the fire marshal comes up and checks fire extinguishers and other matters that really have nothing to do with me. The fire extinguishers are part of the building, part of the building owner, but they still have to look, make sure everything's up to date. And then he came into my actual office space, and really nice guy. We're just kind of shooting the shit. And basically all he said was, hey, just make sure you don't daisy chain power strips. And that was it. Signed off, $30. That's all it was. So now, because of his approval, my city license is coming in the mail, but he said that I can start moving in. It's the other thing I forgot to mention. While working on the city license and building myself up to getting that fire inspection, I couldn't move anything in. So my office, I've basically owned this office space for 2 weeks and haven't been able to do anything with it. But that's where I stand with it now. The first order of business as far as building this studio up is the curtain, the blackout curtain that's going to go over this big window on the east wall of my office. And I'm going to leave it at that for this entry here. The next entry that I do for the studio will cover more of the building of it and how I'm actually designing it and mistakes and wins that I have with that. So until then, I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. And by the way, I'm sorry I should have done this earlier. Please send me a message. Engage with me. Go to my Instagram page at Shelby Rowe Productions LLC, or go to shelbyroweproductions.com, and you can email me through there. Thank you.